The glass doors of Metropolitan General Hospital slid open with a quiet hiss as Marcus Chun stepped inside, his daughter Emma's small hand clutched tightly in his own. The sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with something floral, probably from the gift shop near the entrance, and the sound of soft footsteps echoed through the pristine white corridors. Emma pulled at his sleeve, her other hand wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she refused to leave behind anywhere they went. It had been her constant companion for the past 18 months, ever since the accident that took her mother away from them both. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had avoided this place for as long as he possibly could. Hospitals reminded him of that terrible night when he'd raced through different corridors just like these, his heart pounding with a hope that would soon be shattered into a million pieces. But today there was no choice. Emma had fallen at school during recess, and though the injury seemed minor, the school nurse insisted she needed a proper examination. A possible concussion wasn't something to take lightly, especially not with a 5-year-old child. They approached the reception desk where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her computer screen. Marcus gave his name and explained the situation while Emma stood beside him, unusually quiet. She was normally a chatterbox, filling every silence with questions about clouds, or why dogs couldn't talk, or whether mermaids were real. Today she just held her rabbit closer and stared at the polished floor beneath her small sneakers. The receptionist directed them to the pediatric wing on the 3rd floor, and they made their way to the elevators. Marcus pressed the button and watched the numbers light up one by one as the elevator descended to collect them. He glanced down at Emma, noticing how pale she looked under the harsh fluorescent lighting. Guilt twisted in his chest. He'd been working so much lately, building his technology company into something that could secure their future. But at what cost? How many school plays had he missed? How many bedtime stories had been replaced by hurried phone calls from the office? The elevator arrived empty, and they stepped inside. Marcus selected the 3rd floor and leaned against the metal railing that ran along the wall. Emma remained silent, which worried him more than any tears would have. She was processing something, he could tell. Children were more perceptive than adults often gave them credit for, and Emma had always been especially intuitive, even before tragedy forced her to grow up faster than any child should. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, they were greeted by walls painted in soft yellows and blues, with cartoon animals dancing along the border where wall met ceiling. It was clearly designed to be less intimidating for young patients, though Marcus wasn't sure how effective cheerful giraffes were at easing a child's fear of needles and examinations. They followed the signs to the nurse's station, where they were told to wait in the small seating area while a room was prepared. Marcus chose 2 chairs near the window that overlooked the hospital's interior courtyard. A small garden had been planted there, and even in early autumn, some flowers still bloomed in defiance of the cooling weather. He helped Emma into her seat and sat down beside her, pulling out his phone to check messages he'd been ignoring during the drive over. His assistant had sent 3 texts about a meeting that afternoon. His business partner wanted to discuss the quarterly projections, and there were a dozen emails flagged as urgent. He sighed and put the phone away. None of it mattered as much as making sure his daughter was all right. Emma suddenly sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on something across the hallway. Marcus followed her gaze but saw only the usual hospital activity. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms. Doctors consulted charts. Orderlies pushed equipment on squeaking wheels. Nothing unusual, nothing that should capture a child's attention so completely. Then Emma did something that made his blood run cold. She pointed with one small finger, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the hospital with crystal clarity. "That's Mommy." The words hung in the air between them like something physical, something that could be touched and examined. Marcus felt his heart stop, literally felt it pause in his chest before resuming with a painful thud that echoed in his ears. He turned to look where Emma was pointing, expecting to see nothing, expecting to have to explain once again that Mommy was gone, that she lived in the stars now, that she was watching over them even though they couldn't see her. But what he saw instead made every rational thought flee from his mind. A nurse stood at the station, her back to them as she wrote something on a clipboard. Dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, the same shade of auburn that caught fire in sunlight. The same height, the same build, the same way of standing with weight shifted slightly to the left. As if sensing his stare, the nurse turned, and Marcus forgot how to breathe. The face was identical. Not similar, not reminiscent, but identical. The same high cheekbones, the same slightly pointed chin, the same full lips that quirked up more on the right side when she smiled. Even from this distance, Marcus could see eyes that matched the exact shade of hazel that had haunted his dreams for 18 months. It was Victoria. It was his wife. It was impossible. The nurse finished writing whatever note she'd been making and moved down the hallway, disappearing into one of the patient rooms. Marcus remained frozen in his chair, his mind struggling to process what his eyes had just shown him. Emma tugged at his sleeve insistently, her small face bright with an emotion he hadn't seen there in months. Hope, pure, uncomplicated, childlike hope that made his chest ache with the weight of what he would have to explain. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's not Mommy. Mommy is gone. Remember? We talked about this. But it looks just like her," Emma insisted, her lower lip beginning to tremble. "Exactly like her, Daddy. Did you see? Did you see her face?" Marcus had seen. That was the problem. He had seen, and his logical mind, the same mind that had built a technology empire from nothing, that solved complex problems and made decisions affecting thousands of employees, that mind had completely short-circuited. Because what he'd seen defied every law of nature and reason he'd ever known. "I know. Baby," he said gently, pulling Emma closer. "Sometimes people can look very similar to other people. It's just a coincidence." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were inadequate. This wasn't similar. This wasn't a passing resemblance that might catch your eye for a moment before differences became apparent. This was exact. This was a copy so perfect it seemed like someone had reached into his memories and pulled Victoria out, placed her in a nurse's uniform, and set her walking through this hospital corridor like nothing had ever happened. A young nurse approached them, different from the one Emma had pointed to, with a clipboard and a professional smile. "The Chun family? We have a room ready for Emma now. If you'll follow me." Marcus stood automatically, his body moving through the motions while his mind remained stuck on that impossible glimpse. He took Emma's hand and followed the nurse down a corridor painted with more cheerful animals. Elephants this time, he noted distantly, their trunks raised in permanent celebration of something unknowable. They were led into a small examination room where cartoon dinosaurs smiled down from the walls. The nurse, whose name tag identified her as Sandra, asked Emma to sit on the paper-covered examination table. "The doctor will be with you shortly," Sandra said warmly. "In the meantime, I need to take some basic vital signs. Is that okay, Emma?" Emma nodded, though her eyes kept darting to the door as if expecting someone specific to walk through it. Sandra wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Emma's small arm and began the routine measurements, chatting pleasantly about the stuffed rabbit and asking its name. Emma answered in monosyllables, her attention clearly elsewhere. Marcus tried to focus on what the nurse was saying, something about the doctor being excellent with children, but his thoughts kept circling back to that face in the hallway. Victoria had been an only child. He knew this with absolute certainty because they discussed it many times during their marriage. She'd told him about growing up lonely, wishing for siblings, vowing that if she ever had children of her own, she'd have at least two so they'd always have each other. That wish had died with her, leaving Emma an only child just as Victoria had been. There were no sisters, no cousins that looked similar, no family members that could explain what he'd just seen. Sandra finished her measurements and made notes on her chart. "Everything looks good," she announced. "Normal blood pressure, temperature is fine, heart rate is a tiny bit elevated, but that's expected given the circumstances. The doctor should be here in just a few minutes." After Sandra left, Marcus tried to keep Emma distracted with a book he'd brought in his bag, but she wasn't interested. She kept swinging her legs from the examination table, her eyes fixed on the closed door, clearly waiting for the nurse from the hallway to appear. Marcus knew he should say something more, should prepare her for the inevitable disappointment, but the words wouldn't come, because a small, irrational part of him was waiting too, hoping against hope that when the door opened, he'd see that face again and somehow it would all make sense. The door did open, but it was a doctor who entered, a man in his 50s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that perched on the end of his nose. He introduced himself as Dr. Patterson and immediately engaged Emma in conversation about her rabbit, asking if it had ever been to a hospital before, whether it was nervous, if it might need an examination too. Emma warmed to him slightly, and Marcus felt grateful for the doctor's easy manner with children. Dr. Patterson conducted a thorough examination, checking Emma's pupils with a small light, asking her to follow his finger with her eyes, testing her reflexes and balance. He asked questions about the fall, about whether she'd lost consciousness even briefly, whether she remembered everything that happened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma answered clearly, describing how she'd been running during tag and tripped over her own feet, landing hard on her side and hitting her head on the playground equipment. The good news is I don't see any signs of concussion, Dr. Patterson said after finishing his examination. No confusion, pupils are responding normally, reflexes are all good. She's going to have a nasty bruise on her temple and probably one on her ribs where she landed, but children are remarkably resilient. I'd recommend monitoring her closely for the next 24 hours. If she develops any headache, nausea, drowsiness, or confusion, bring her back immediately. Otherwise, she should be fine with rest and maybe some ice on those bruises. Marcus felt relief wash over him, loosening tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying in his shoulders. Thank you, doctor. I'll watch her carefully. Dr. Patterson made some notes on his tablet and then smiled at Emma. You're a brave girl. Make sure you take it easy for a day or two, okay? No more running races on the playground until those bruises heal. Emma nodded solemnly, and the doctor left the room with a friendly wave. Marcus helped Emma down from the examination table, gathering their things and preparing to leave. He was reaching for the door handle when it opened from the outside, and a nurse stepped in to collect the examination room paperwork that Dr. Patterson had left on the counter. It was her, the nurse from the hallway. Up close, in the confined space of the examination room, the resemblance was even more staggering, even more impossible to dismiss as coincidence or wishful thinking. Marcus felt his hand freeze on the door handle, felt his breath catch in his throat, felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The nurse looked up from the paperwork and her eyes met his. For a moment, they both simply stared, and Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Surprise? Recognition? Confusion? It passed too quickly for him to identify, replaced by a professional mask of polite neutrality. Mommy. Emma's voice shattered the silence, high-pitched and filled with joy. She launched herself forward, arms outstretched, ready to embrace this stranger who wore her mother's face. The nurse took an instinctive step back, her eyes widening. Marcus moved quickly, catching Emma before she could reach the woman, scooping his daughter into his arms even as she struggled against his hold. Emma, no, he said firmly. This isn't Mommy. We talked about this. But she looks exactly like her. Emma was crying now, real tears streaming down her cheeks. Why does she look like Mommy if she's not Mommy? The nurse had gone pale, pressing back against the counter, as if she needed its support. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice was wrong. That was the first difference Marcus could identify. Victoria's voice had been slightly deeper, with a hint of raspiness that came from years of singing in her college choir. This woman's voice was higher, softer, less certain. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset her. I should go. Wait, Marcus heard himself say, even though letting her leave was probably the sensible thing to do. Please, just wait a moment. The nurse hesitated, her hand on the door handle, clearly torn between professional obligation and the desire to escape this uncomfortable situation. Emma had buried her face in Marcus's shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. Marcus felt torn in a dozen directions at once. He needed to comfort his daughter, needed to leave this hospital and go home where things made sense, needed to never think about this moment again. But he also needed to understand, needed to know how this was possible, needed to look at this woman's face and find the differences that must exist, the small details that would prove she was just a stranger with an unfortunate resemblance. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This must be very awkward for you. My wife passed away 18 months ago, and my daughter, she thought she saw her mother. The resemblance is quite striking." The nurse's expression shifted to something like sympathy, though Marcus thought he detected something else underneath it. Uncertainty? Fear? "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said carefully. "I can imagine how difficult this must be. Children process grief in complicated ways." Her name tag read Claire Morrison, RN. Marcus committed the name to memory, though he wasn't sure why. What would he do with it? Look her up? Follow her? Demand to know why she looked exactly like his dead wife? All of those options seemed insane, yet here he was seriously considering each one. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with a question. "I know this is irregular, but I'd really like to understand. Have you ever had anyone else mention this resemblance? Do you have family from the Seattle area?" Claire's grip tightened on the door handle. "I really should get back to my rounds. I'm sorry, I can't help you." There was something in her tone, a note of panic that made Marcus's investigative instincts, honed through years of business negotiations and competitive research, sharpened to attention. She wasn't just uncomfortable. She was frightened. Of what? Of him? Of the situation? Or something else entirely? "Please," he tried again. "My daughter needs closure. She needs to understand why someone who looks so much like her mother exists. It doesn't have to be now, but perhaps we could arrange a time to talk. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just need answers." Claire's eyes darted between Marcus and Emma, who had lifted her head from her father's shoulder and was watching the nurse with red-rimmed eyes. For a moment, Marcus thought she might agree, might offer some explanation that would make sense of this impossible situation. But then her expression hardened, the professional mask sliding back into place. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Chun, but I really can't help you. I have patients waiting. Please take care of your daughter." Before Marcus could respond, she slipped through the door and was gone, her footsteps echoing quickly down the corridor, as if she were fleeing rather than simply returning to work. Marcus stood in the empty examination room holding his weeping daughter, feeling as if he'd just watched a ghost walk away from him. The drive home was silent except for Emma's occasional sniffle from the back seat. Marcus kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, watching as she clutched her rabbit and stared out the window at the passing cityscape. The Seattle skyline rose in the distance, familiar spires of glass and steel that normally gave him a sense of accomplishment and belonging. Today they looked foreign, as if he were seeing them through someone else's eyes. Their home was a modern house in one of Seattle's upscale neighborhoods. All clean lines and floor to ceiling windows that Victoria had fallen in love with the moment they toured it. Marcus had bought it for her without hesitation, watching her excitement as she planned which rooms would be what, where Emma's playroom would go, which wall she wanted to paint as an accent in their bedroom. That enthusiasm felt like it belonged to a different lifetime, to different people who hadn't yet learned how fragile happiness could be. He pulled into the garage and helped Emma out of her car seat, noting how she winced when he lifted her. The bruise on her ribs was probably hurting now that the shock of the fall and the confusion of the hospital visit were wearing off. He made a mental note to give her some children's pain medication once they got inside. Mrs. Chin's housekeeper, Margaret, met them at the door connecting the garage to the house. She was a woman in her early 60s who had been with them since Emma was born, and who had become an invaluable support system after Victoria's death. Her face creased with concern when she saw Emma's tear-stained cheeks. "Oh dear, is everything all right?" The school called but said it wasn't serious. "No concussion," Marcus assured her. "Just some bruises. But we had a difficult afternoon. I'll explain later." Margaret nodded, asking no further questions, and offered to make Emma's favorite snack. Emma perked up slightly at the mention of apple slices with peanut butter, and Margaret whisked her away to the kitchen, leaving Marcus alone in the entryway. He stood there for a moment, surrounded by the trappings of his successful life, the expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture, the view of Lake Washington through the living room windows, and felt completely untethered from all of it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His assistant again, probably wondering where he was and whether he'd make the afternoon meeting. Marcus pulled out the phone and typed a quick message, canceling everything for the rest of the day, citing a family emergency. It wasn't entirely untrue. This felt like an emergency, even if he couldn't articulate exactly what kind. He walked through the house to his home office, a room Victoria had helped him design when they first moved in. She'd insisted on comfortable furniture, not just functional pieces, and had chosen warm wood tones instead of the cold metal and glass he'd initially wanted. As always, she'd been right. This room had become his sanctuary, the place where he could think clearly and make the decisions that built his company into what it was today. Marcus sat in his leather desk chair and opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before he began typing. He pulled up the hospital's website and navigated to the staff directory. It took a few minutes of searching, but he finally found her. Claire Morrison, registered nurse, pediatric wing. There was a small photo, professional and neutral, but it was enough to confirm what he'd seen. The resemblance to Victoria was unmistakable even in the low-resolution image. He stared at the photo for a long time, zooming in on the features, comparing them to his memories of Victoria. The shape of the eyes was identical, the curve of the eyebrows, the line of the jaw, even the way she held her head slightly tilted in the photo. That was pure Victoria. How is this possible? Marcus's mind began working through possibilities, applying the same logical problem-solving approach he used in business. Coincidence seemed unlikely given the exactness of the resemblance. Distant relation was possible, but wouldn't explain why Victoria had never mentioned family that looked so similar. Twins separated at birth? That felt like something from a television movie, but he supposed it was theoretically possible. He opened a new search window and began researching. Twin adoption statistics. Separation of siblings in the foster system. Missing persons records. He wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly, but he needed information, needed data, needed something concrete to work with instead of this feeling of drowning in impossible questions. Hours passed without him noticing. Margaret came to tell him dinner was ready, and he waved her away absently. Emma needed to eat, he said, but he wasn't hungry. Margaret gave him a long look that said she understood this was about more than just lack of appetite, but she left him alone with his research. By the time darkness had fully settled outside his office windows, Marcus had compiled a file of information that raised more questions than it answered. He'd found records of Victoria's birth at Seattle General Hospital, verified her parents' names, confirmed there was no mention of twins or multiple births. He'd looked up Claire Morrison's basic public information, finding that she'd moved to Seattle 3 years ago from Portland, that she had no criminal record, that she'd been working at Metropolitan General for 2 years. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would explain the impossible resemblance. A soft knock on his office door pulled Marcus from his spiraling thoughts. He looked up to find Emma standing in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit dragging on the floor beside her. She was wearing her pajamas, yellow ones with moons and stars that Victoria had bought for her last birthday. The sight of them made Marcus's heart clench. "Daddy," Emma said in a small voice. "I can't sleep." Marcus pushed back from his desk and held out his arms. Emma ran to him, climbing into his lap despite being almost too big for it now. She tucked her head under his chin, and Marcus wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm sorry about today," Emma whispered. "I know that lady wasn't really Mommy, but she looked so much like her." "I know," baby Marcus said, his voice thick. "She'd look like Mommy. That must have been very confusing for you. Do you think maybe Mommy sent her?" Emma asked, her child's logic trying to make sense of the impossible. "Like an angel or something, to watch over us?" Marcus didn't believe in angels or divine intervention or any of the comforting supernatural explanations people offered for the inexplicable. But looking down at his daughter's hopeful face, he couldn't bring himself to crush that small spark of possibility. "Maybe," he said softly, "or maybe it's just one of those strange things that happen sometimes. The world is full of mysteries, sweetheart." Can we go back and see her again? Emma asked. The lady, Claire. Can we talk to her and find out why she looks like Mommy? Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to let this go, to protect Emma from further confusion and himself from the pain of seeing Victoria's face on a stranger. But another part of him, the part that had built a successful company by refusing to accept mysteries and instead demanding answers, needed to understand. We'll see, he said finally. First, you need to rest and let those bruises heal. Then we'll figure out what to do. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, or at least too tired to push further. Marcus carried her to her bedroom, tucked her into bed with a rabbit, and sat beside her until she fell asleep. He watched her peaceful face in the dim light from her nightlight, a small moon that projected stars across her ceiling, and wondered what Victoria would have wanted him to do in this situation. Victoria had been the practical one in their relationship, the one who could see clear paths through complicated situations while Marcus got lost in overthinking every possibility. She would have known how to handle this, how to protect Emma while also acknowledging the strangeness of what they'd witnessed. She would have had words of wisdom, delivered with that slightly crooked smile that made everything seem manageable. But Victoria was gone, and Marcus was left to navigate this impossible situation alone. Back in his office, Marcus pulled up the photo of Claire Morrison again, studying it in the light of his desk lamp. Who was she? Why did she look exactly like his dead wife? And why had she seemed so frightened when he asked to talk? He thought back to her reaction in the examination room, the way she'd pressed against the counter as if trapped, the panic in her eyes when he suggested they talk. That wasn't the reaction of someone simply uncomfortable with being mistaken for someone else. That was the reaction of someone with something to hide. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his analytical mind beginning to form a plan. He couldn't just let this go. Emma needed closure. Yes, but more than that, he needed to understand. Needed to know if there was some connection he was missing, some piece of Victoria's past she'd never shared with him. His wife had been the most open person he'd ever known, sharing her thoughts and feelings without reservation. But everyone had secrets, didn't they? Small corners of their past they kept private. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. David Richardson, a private investigator Marcus had used several times for business-related research. Discreet, thorough, and expensive. If anyone could find out who Claire Morrison really was and why she looked identical to Victoria Chun, it would be David. Marcus typed out a message explaining the situation in brief, clinical terms, leaving out the emotional weight of what he'd witnessed. He attached Claire's photo from the hospital website and Victoria's photo from their wedding. Then he hesitated, his thumb hovering over the send button. Was this crossing a line? Invading this woman's privacy because she happened to have an unfortunate resemblance to someone from his past? But it wasn't just resemblance. It was exactness. It was impossibility. And the way she'd reacted suggested there was more to this story than simple coincidence. Marcus pressed send. The response came within minutes. David had received the photos and would begin preliminary research immediately. He estimated having initial findings within 24 hours. Marcus thanked him and set the phone aside, feeling both relieved and guilty. He was taking action, moving toward answers, but at what cost to this woman's privacy? Sleep was impossible that night. Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying those few minutes in the examination room over and over. The shock of seeing that face. Emma's joy turning to confusion and tears. Claire's panic when he asked to talk. Every detail seemed significant, seemed to be pointing toward some truth he couldn't quite grasp. Around 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went down to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark waters of Lake Washington, and tried to imagine what Victoria would say if she could see him now. Would she tell him to let go? Would she be as curious as he was? Would she understand this desperate need to know? His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from David. Can't sleep either. Preliminary findings are interesting. Call me when you get a chance. Marcus's heart rate picked up. He glanced at the clock. 3:15 in the morning was hardly a reasonable time to call someone. but David had initiated contact. He dialed the number. David answered on the first ring, sounding wide awake. "Marcus, thanks for calling back. I know it's late, but I thought you'd want to hear this right away." "What did you find?" Marcus asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Well, for starters, Claire Morrison isn't her real name." David's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering shocking information as if it were mundane business intelligence. She changed it legally 3 years ago when she moved to Seattle. Before that, she was Claire Whitmore, originally from a small town in Oregon called Millbrook. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Why would someone change their name unless they were running from something? Or hiding something? "That's what I thought too," David continued. "So I dug deeper. Claire Whitmore grew up in foster care. Entered the system when she was 3 days old, was never adopted, aged out at 18. Worked her way through nursing school on scholarships and part-time jobs. Completely clean record, no red flags in her background. But here's where it gets interesting." Marcus waited, his knuckles white where he gripped the counter's edge. "I cross-referenced her birth records with your wife's," David said slowly. "Claire Whitmore was born on March 8th at Sacred Heart Hospital in Millbrook, Oregon. Your wife, Victoria Chun, was born on March 8th at Seattle General Hospital in Seattle, Washington. Same day, same year. And according to the records I found, both births were attended by the same doctor." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "How could the same doctor be in 2 different cities on the same day?" "Exactly," David replied. "Which means either there's an error in the records, which seems unlikely given that I found the doctor's name in multiple independent sources, or one of these birth certificates isn't telling the whole story." Marcus felt his mind racing, try to piece together what this meant. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," David said carefully. "I'm just telling you what the facts show. Same birth date, same attending physician, and, according to the physical description on Claire's original birth records, same physical characteristics. Brown hair, hazel eyes, birthmarks in the same locations. Marcus, I think you might be looking at twins who were separated at birth." The words hung in the silence between them. Twins, separated at birth. It sounded absurd, like something from a melodrama, not real life. But it would explain everything. The identical appearance, Claire's panic when confronted, her changed name. She knew. She had to know. Why wouldn't Victoria's parents have told her? Marcus asked, "Why keep something like that secret?" "That's the question, isn't it?" David agreed. "I'm going to keep digging, see what I can find about the circumstances of their births, about why they might have been separated. But Marcus, this is going to take time. Birth records from that era aren't always digitized, and if there is something irregular about the adoption or separation, people involved might have good reasons for keeping it quiet." "How long?" Marcus asked. "Give me a week. Maybe less if I get lucky. In the meantime, I'd suggest you don't approach Claire Morrison directly. If she's been living under an assumed name for 3 years, she's clearly trying to maintain distance from her past. Confronting her could backfire." Marcus thought about Emma, about her tear-stained face and desperate hope. "I'm not sure I can wait a week. My daughter saw her. She thinks she saw her mother." "I understand," David said sympathetically. "But you need to be strategic about this. If Claire Morrison is really your wife's twin sister, and if she's been kept in the dark about it her whole life, revealing that truth needs to be handled carefully. Not just for her sake, but for yours and Emma's too." Marcus knew David was right, but patience had never been his strong suit. When he identified a problem, he wanted to solve it immediately, to take action and achieve results. Waiting while someone else gathered information went against every instinct he had. After ending the call with David, Marcus remained at the kitchen window as the sky slowly lightened from black to deep blue to the pale gray of dawn. He thought about Victoria, about the life they'd built together, about all the conversations they'd had over the years. Had she known? Had she suspected that somewhere out there was someone who shared her face, her birthday, her genetic code? He remembered once, early in their relationship, Victoria had mentioned feeling incomplete sometimes, as if a piece of her was missing. Marcus had assumed she was talking about the loss of her parents, both of whom had died before they met. But what if it was something else? What if on some deep, instinctive level, she'd sensed the absence of the twin she never knew she had? The thought was fanciful, Not at all the kind of logical reasoning Marcus usually engaged in, but grief and confusion were making him consider possibilities he normally would have dismissed. As the morning light strengthened, Marcus heard movement upstairs. Emma was awake. He pushed away from the counter and went to make breakfast, trying to shift his mind into father mode, trying to be present for his daughter instead of lost in the mystery that had consumed his thoughts all night. Emma came downstairs still in her star-patterned pajamas, her rabbit tucked under one arm. She climbed onto a stool at the kitchen island while Marcus prepared her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with strawberries on the side. She ate quietly, and Marcus could see her mind working behind her eyes, processing yesterday's events. "Daddy," she said eventually, syrup on her chin. "I've been thinking." "About what, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, wiping her face with a napkin. "About the lady at the hospital. If she's not Mommy, but she looks exactly like Mommy, maybe she's Mommy's sister. Like how my friend Jessica has a sister who looks just like her." Marcus felt his breath catch. Children's logic could be remarkably astute sometimes. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went. "That's a very smart thought, Emma. You might be right." Emma's face brightened. "So can we find out? Can we ask her if she was Mommy's sister?" This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. How did he explain to a 5-year-old that adults sometimes kept secrets, that families could be separated by circumstances beyond anyone's control, that the truth wasn't always simple or kind? How did he explain that the woman who might be her aunt apparently didn't want to be found, had changed her name and rebuilt her life specifically to avoid connections to her past? "It's complicated, baby," he said finally, "but I'm trying to find out. I have someone helping me look into it. Can you be patient while we figure this out?" Emma nodded solemnly, seeming to understand that this was important, that it required the kind of waiting that came before Christmas or birthdays, anticipation mixed with uncertainty. "Okay, Daddy, but you'll tell me as soon as you know?" "I promise," Marcus said, and meant it. Whatever he discovered, whatever truth lay beneath this impossible resemblance, Emma deserved to know. She'd lost her mother far too young. If there was a chance she had an aunt out there, someone who shared her mother's blood and possibly her mother's kindness, she deserved that connection. The next few days passed in a strange fog. Marcus went through the motions of running his company, attending meetings, reviewing proposals, making decisions about budgets and product development. But his mind was always elsewhere, waiting for David's next update, replaying that brief encounter at the hospital, imagining what he would say when he finally had answers to give Emma. David called twice more with additional findings. He tracked down the doctor who had attended both births, an elderly man now retired and living in Arizona. The coffee shop was quieter than Claire had expected for a Thursday morning. She sat in the corner booth farthest from the windows, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Her shift didn't start for another 3 hours, but sleep had been impossible since that encounter in the examination room 5 days ago. 5 days of looking over her shoulder, of jumping every time someone entered a room unexpectedly, of wondering if Marcus Chan would show up demanding answers she didn't have. Claire had spent her entire adult life running from the past, from questions about where she came from and why she'd been left behind. She'd built a new identity in Seattle, a quiet life where she could help children and their families without anyone asking about her own history. The name change had been the final step in that reinvention, shedding Claire Whitmore like an old coat that no longer fit, becoming Claire Morrison, a woman with no complicated backstory, no painful childhood, no unanswered questions that kept her awake at night. But now all of that careful construction felt fragile, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. Because that little girl's face, Emma's face, had been so full of hope and recognition. And the father's expression had shifted from shock to something more dangerous. Curiosity, determination, the look of a man who wouldn't let go until he had answers. Claire's phone sat on the table beside her cold tea, and she found herself checking it compulsively even though she didn't know who she expected to call. She had no family, no close friends who knew about her past. The only person who had ever known the full story was her caseworker from the foster system, Mrs. Patterson, and she died 3 years ago. That death had been part of what prompted Claire's move to Seattle, the severing of the last thread connecting her to Claire Whitmore. A shadow fell across her table, and Claire looked up sharply, her heart racing. But it was just the waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, asking if Claire wanted a refill. Claire declined, and the waitress moved on, leaving her alone with her spiraling thoughts once more. The truth was that Claire had always known she was different, not in any supernatural sense, but in the way adopted children often know, that sense of being incomplete, of missing some essential piece of yourself. She'd asked her foster parents about it when she was young, before she learned that such questions only brought uncomfortable silences and vague reassurances. The official story was that she'd been abandoned at the hospital, that her birth mother had left no information, no clues, no reason for why she couldn't keep her baby. But Claire had never fully believed that story. There were too many inconsistencies, too many documents with information blacked out, too many questions her caseworkers wouldn't or couldn't answer. When she finally got access to her own files at 18, she'd found so many redactions that the pages looked more black than white. Something had been hidden deliberately and thoroughly. She tried to investigate on her own over the years, hiring a private investigator with money she'd saved from her first nursing job. He'd found nothing useful, just confirmed what she already knew. Claire Whitmore had been born at Sacred Heart Hospital in Millbrook, Oregon, on March 8th. Mother unknown. Father unknown. No siblings on record. No medical history beyond the basics. It was as if she'd materialized out of thin air, a person with no past. The investigator had suggested that perhaps her mother had been very young, or in an abusive situation, or dealing with addiction. Any number of tragic circumstances that might lead a woman to leave her newborn at a hospital with no identifying information. Claire had accepted these explanations because what else could she do? The trail was cold, the people involved were gone or unreachable, and constantly dwelling on unanswerable questions was no way to live a life. So she focused on moving forward instead. Nursing school, then her license, then jobs in Portland before the move to Seattle. She dated occasionally, never seriously, always holding back the part of herself that felt incomplete. How could she build a future with someone when she didn't understand her own past? It had seemed impossible, so she poured her energy into her work instead, finding purpose in caring for sick children, in being present for families during their most vulnerable moments. And then Emma Chun had pointed at her and said those 3 words that shattered everything. That's Mommy. Claire had seen photographs before, had caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and shop windows, and thought for just a moment that she was seeing someone else. But she'd never, in all her 32 years, seen someone who looked exactly like her. Not similar, not reminiscent, exact. It had been like looking into a mirror that showed a different life, a different set of choices, a different everything. Marcus Chun had mentioned his wife dying 18 months ago. Claire had done the math immediately, even in her shocked state. That meant Victoria Chun had been alive until recently, had been living her life, raising her daughter, loving her husband, all while Claire existed in parallel, unaware of this doppelganger walking the earth. How is that possible? How could 2 people be so identical without sharing blood? Unless they did share blood. The thought had been creeping into Claire's mind all week, unwelcome but persistent. She dismissed it at first because it seemed too convenient, too much like the plot of a movie. But the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. Twins separated at birth. One adopted or kept, the other given up. It would explain everything. The identical appearance, the same birthday, the feeling of incompleteness she'd carried her whole life. Claire pulled out her phone and opened the browser, typing with shaking fingers. Victoria Chun Obituary Seattle. The results came up immediately, and Claire clicked on the first link. A photograph loaded, a professional headshot of a woman smiling at the camera, and Claire felt her breath leave her body in a rush. It was her face, her exact face. Not just similar, not just reminiscent, but identical in every detail. The same slight asymmetry in the smile, the same pattern of freckles across the bridge of the nose, the same small scar above the right eyebrow that Claire had gotten from falling off a swing set when she was 7. Everything. Claire's hand was shaking so badly, she almost dropped the phone. She set it carefully on the table and pressed her palms flat against the cool surface, trying to ground herself, trying to slow her racing heart. The obituary text swam before her eyes, but she forced herself to read it. Victoria Chun, beloved wife and mother, passed away tragically in a car accident on April 15th. She was 31 years old. Born Victoria Harrison on March 8th in Seattle, Washington, she graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in elementary education. She taught kindergarten for 5 years before becoming a stay-at-home mother to her daughter Emma. She is survived by her husband Marcus Chun, founder and CEO of Chun Technologies, and her daughter Emma, age 4. Victoria was known for her kindness, her love of music, and her dedication to her family. A celebration of life will be held at Sunset Memorial Gardens. March 8th, the same birthday. Claire felt dizzy, felt the coffee shop tilting around her. She grabbed her teacup for something solid to hold on to, not caring that it was cold, just needing the physical sensation to keep her anchored to reality. If Victoria Harrison had been born in Seattle on March 8th, and Claire Whitmore had been born in Millbrook, Oregon on March 8th, how could they be the same person? They couldn't, which meant they had to be siblings, had to be twins. There was no other explanation that made sense. But why had they been separated? Why had Victoria apparently grown up knowing nothing about a twin sister? Why had Claire's records been so heavily redacted? What had happened on March 8th, 32 years ago that led to two identical babies being sent to completely different lives? Claire's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from her supervisor at the hospital asking if she could come in early to cover for a colleague who'd called in sick. Claire stared at the message for a long moment before responding that she couldn't, that she had a personal matter to handle. It was the first time in 2 years she'd turned down an extra shift, but she couldn't go to that hospital right now. Couldn't risk running into Marcus Chin again. Couldn't face those questions she had no answers to. She paid for her tea and left the coffee shop, stepping out into the gray Seattle morning. The sky was overcast as always, threatening rain that might or might not materialize. Claire walked without direction, her feet carrying her through familiar streets while her mind churned through implications and possibilities. If she and Victoria really were twins, then Emma was her niece. The thought made something in Claire's chest ache with unexpected longing. She'd never had family, never had anyone who shared her blood, her history. And now there was this little girl who looked at her with such hope, such desperate need for connection. What did she owe Emma? What did she owe Marcus? What did she owe the memory of a sister she never knew existed? Claire found herself at the waterfront, standing at the railing that overlooked Elliott Bay. Ferries crisscrossed the gray water, carrying their loads of commuters and tourists. The Space Needle rose in the distance, a landmark she saw every day but rarely registered. Everything looked the same as it always had, but Claire felt fundamentally altered, as if learning about Victoria had changed something essential in her understanding of herself. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Claire almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept at the last moment. Ms. Morrison? This is David Richardson. I'm a private investigator working for Marcus Chun. I was hoping we could talk. Claire's first instinct was to hang up immediately, but instead she heard herself say, "How did you get this number?" "I'm very good at my job," David replied matter-of-factly. "Ms. Morrison, or should I say Ms. Whitmore, I know this is unexpected and probably unwelcome, but I think you deserve to know what I've found. What Mr. Chin has asked me to investigate." Claire's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," David said gently. "I've been researching the circumstances of your birth and Victoria Chin's birth. There are some significant irregularities in the records. I believe you and Victoria were twins who were separated shortly after birth. And I think you've suspected this for some time now." Tears burned behind Claire's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry in public, refusing to show weakness, even to a stranger on the phone who couldn't see her. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," David said. "This isn't a hostile investigation. Mr. Chun isn't trying to expose you or make your life difficult. He just wants to understand. His daughter saw you and thought you were her mother. He needs to be able to explain to Emma why someone who looks exactly like her mother exists. And I suspect you might want to know the truth, too. The truth Claire repeated hollowly. The truth is that I was abandoned. That whoever my parents were, they didn't want me. That's all the truth I've ever needed. Is it? David asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent your entire adult life running from that truth, trying to build a new identity where the past can't touch you. But the past has a way of catching up, Ms. Whitmore. Ms. Morrison, whoever you are now. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy blanket. I need time to think. Of course, David agreed. But I should tell you that Mr. Chun is determined to find answers. With or without your cooperation, he's going to piece together what happened. It might be better if you were part of that process rather than just the subject of it. After the call ended, Claire stood at the railing for a long time, watching the water and trying to decide what to do. She could keep running, could disappear again, change her name a second time, start over in a new city where no one would look at her and see a ghost. But she was tired of running, tired of questions with no answers, tired of feeling incomplete. And there was Emma, that little girl who'd looked at her with such hope, such certainty that her mother had somehow returned. Claire couldn't imagine the pain of losing a parent so young, couldn't imagine how confusing it must be to see someone who looked exactly like that lost parent. Didn't Emma deserve to know the truth? Didn't she deserve to understand that she had an aunt, even if that aunt was a stranger? Claire pulled out her phone, and before she could second-guess herself, she typed a message to the number David Richardson had called from. Tell Marcus Chun I'll meet with him, but not at the hospital, somewhere neutral. And I want answers too. If he's been investigating my past, I want to know everything he's found. The response came within seconds. Tomorrow, Pike Place Market, 10 in the morning. There's a small coffee shop on the lower level called Harbor Brew. I'll send you the location. Claire confirmed and put her phone away, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. She'd made a decision, crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. Whatever came next, there was no going back to the simple life she'd tried to build, the life where her past was sealed away and couldn't hurt her. She spent the rest of the day preparing herself mentally for the meeting, rehearsing questions and steeling herself for whatever revelations might come. That night she barely slept, lying in her small apartment and staring at the ceiling, wondering what Victoria's life had been like. Had she been happy? Had she felt that same sense of incompleteness that Claire had always carried? Had she ever suspected that somewhere out there was someone who shared her face? Morning came gray and damp, typical Seattle weather that matched Claire's mood perfectly. She dressed carefully in jeans and a simple sweater, wanted to look approachable, but not like she tried too hard. She left her apartment early and took a bus to Pike Place Market, arriving 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting. The market was already busy with early morning shoppers and tourists taking photographs of the famous fish-throwing vendors. Claire made her way down to the lower level, past stalls selling everything from antiques to handmade jewelry, until she found Harbor Brew tucked into a quiet corner. It was a small space with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture, the kind of place where locals went to escape the tourist crowds above. She ordered a coffee she didn't want and chose a table in the back where she could see the entrance. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the shop could hear it. She checked her phone compulsively, watching the minutes tick toward 10 o'clock. Marcus Chun arrived exactly on time. Claire recognized him immediately. That same tall figure, those same sharp eyes that had looked at her with such intensity in the hospital examination room. But today there was something different in his expression. Not anger or accusation, but something more complex. Hope mixed with trepidation, determination mixed with uncertainty. He spotted her and walked over, moving with the confidence of someone used to being in control but tempered by the obvious discomfort of the situation. Ms. Morrison, thank you for agreeing to meet. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus sat down across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, this stranger who held pieces of a puzzle Claire had been trying to solve her whole life. I know this is awkward, Marcus began. I know you probably want nothing to do with me or my family. But I need you to understand that this isn't just curiosity. My daughter saw you and thought you were her mother. She's been asking about you every day. She needs to understand why someone who looks exactly like her mom exists in the world. I saw the obituary, Claire said quietly. Victoria. She looked just like me. You look just like her, Marcus corrected gently. She was here first, lived a full life, had a family who loved her. I'm not trying to diminish your existence by saying that, just being accurate about the timeline. Claire felt a flash of irritation at the correction, but pushed it down. He was grieving, she reminded herself. People said strange things when they were grieving. What did your investigator find? Marcus pulled out a folder from the bag he'd brought and placed it on the table between them. Everything that David Richardson uncovered about your birth and Victoria's. It's not complete. There are still gaps and questions. But there's enough here to make a strong case that you and Victoria were twins who were separated shortly after birth. Claire's hands shook as she reached for the folder. She opened it slowly, half afraid of what she might find. The first page was a photocopy of her original birth certificate, the one from Sacred Heart Hospital in Millbrook. Mother unknown. Father unknown. Date of birth March 8th. Time of birth listed as 3:42 in the morning. The next page was Victoria's birth certificate. Born at Seattle General Hospital. Mother listed as Margaret Harrison. Father listed as Thomas Harrison. Date of birth March 8th. Time of birth listed as 3:18 in the morning. 24 minutes apart, Marcus said quietly. You were born 24 minutes apart in hospitals that are a 3-hour drive from each other. Same attending physician listed on both certificates, which should have been impossible, unless the birth certificates were falsified. Claire felt cold all over. Why would someone falsify birth certificates? To hide the fact that twins were being separated, Marcus said. David tracked down the doctor, Dr. Raymond Foster. He's retired now, living in Arizona. He initially refused to talk, but David could be very persuasive. Dr. Foster finally admitted that he was present at a home birth on March 8, 32 years ago. The mother was a woman named Margaret Harrison, Victoria's mother according to the official record. She gave birth to twin girls. So Victoria's parents knew, Claire said, her voice hollow. They knew I existed, and they chose to keep her and give me up. It's more complicated than that, Marcus said. According to Dr. Foster, Margaret Harrison was in a desperate situation. She just lost her husband to cancer 3 months before you and Victoria were born. She had no family support, no income, massive medical bills. When the twins were born, Dr. Foster says she broke down completely. She couldn't see how she could possibly care for 2 infants on her own. So she abandoned one, Claire said bitterly. Kept the one she wanted more and threw the other away like garbage. Marcus flinched at her words. That's not how Dr. Foster described it. He said Margaret was devastated by the choice. But there was a couple in Millbrook, friends of Dr. Foster, who'd been trying to adopt for years. They were good people with resources, ready to provide a loving home. Dr. Foster suggested that perhaps one twin could go to them, and Margaret agreed. But she insisted that Victoria never know she'd had a twin. She didn't want either daughter growing up feeling guilty or incomplete. Well, that plan worked brilliantly, Claire said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice and not caring. I've only felt incomplete my entire life. I've only spent 32 years wondering why I wasn't good enough to keep. You were good enough, Marcus said firmly. This wasn't about your worth. It was about impossible circumstances and a mother who made a choice she thought was best. A wrong choice maybe, but not a malicious one. Claire looked down at the documents in the folder, at the proof of her existence and the proof of how thoroughly she'd been erased from her twin's life. What happened to the couple in Millbrook? The ones who were supposed to give me a loving home? Marcus's expression grew sad. They died in a car accident when you were 5 years old. After that, you entered the foster system. Dr. Foster said he tried to reach out to Margaret Harrison then, to tell her what happened, to suggest that maybe you could be reunited with your twin. But Margaret had already told Victoria that she was an only child. She'd built a life around that story. She refused to disrupt it. So I stayed in foster care, Claire said. Bounced from home to home because my biological mother didn't want to tell her precious daughter the truth. Margaret Harrison died when Victoria was 16, Marcus said softly. Cancer, like her husband. Victoria was raised by a distant aunt after that. She rarely spoke about her childhood to me. I always thought it was because losing both parents had been too painful. Now I wonder if she sensed somehow that something in her history didn't add up. Claire closed the folder, unable to look at the documents anymore. This is a lot to process. I know, Marcus said, and I'm sorry to dump it all on you like this. But I thought you deserved to know. You deserve to understand that you weren't abandoned because you were unwanted. You were given up because your mother thought she was giving you a better chance at life. It didn't work out that way, Claire said flatly. Foster care wasn't a better chance. It was years of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was just temporary in everyone's life. Do you know what that does to a child? To never have stability, to never have anyone who's committed to you long-term? Marcus was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted. I can't imagine. I'm sorry that happened to you. You deserve better. The simple acknowledgement, without qualification or excuse, made something in Claire's chest loosen slightly. She'd expected him to defend Victoria's mother, to make more arguments about impossible choices and desperate circumstances. The fact that he didn't, that he simply acknowledged her pain, meant more than she'd anticipated. What do you want from me? Claire asked. Why track all this down? Why not just explain to your daughter that sometimes people look alike and leave it at that? Because Emma asked if you might be her aunt, Marcus said, and I couldn't lie to her. She's lost so much already. If there's a chance she has family out there, someone connected to her mother, she deserves to know. And honestly, I needed to understand too. Looking at you, it's like seeing Victoria again. That's been difficult for me to process. I'm not Victoria, Claire said firmly. We may share DNA, but we're completely different people. We had completely different lives. I know that, Marcus assured her. I'm not looking for a replacement or a way to pretend Victoria isn't gone. I just think Emma deserves the chance to know her aunt. And maybe you deserve the chance to know your niece. Claire thought about Emma, that little girl with a tear-stained face and desperate hope. She thought about all the years she'd spent wishing for family, for someone who shared her blood and her history. And now here was Marcus offering exactly that, wrapped up in complicated circumstances and painful truths. I don't know how to be an aunt, Claire said quietly. I don't know how to be family to anyone. None of us really know how to be anything until we try, Marcus replied. Emma's going through a rough time. She still asks when her mommy is coming home, even though we've explained death to her as gently as we can. Seeing you brought that grief back to the surface. But maybe, with time and patience, it could also bring healing. For both of you. Claire looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw genuine care in his expression. He wasn't trying to manipulate her or use her as some kind of replacement for his lost wife. He was a father trying to help his daughter heal, and maybe trying to heal himself in the process. I need time, Claire said finally. This is all very overwhelming. I need to think about what I want, what I can handle. Of course, Marcus agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. But when you're ready, even if it's just for coffee or a walk in the park, I think it would mean a lot to Emma. And maybe to you too. He stood to leave, but paused before walking away. One more thing. Victoria was an incredible person. Kind, patient, full of life. Everyone who knew her loved her. I think she would have been devastated to learn she had a twin out there who went through what you did. She would have wanted to know you. Would have wanted to be part of your life. For whatever that's worth. After he left, Claire sat in a coffee shop for a long time, the folder of documents in front of her. She opened it again and looked at the photographs David Richardson had included. Victoria at her wedding, radiant in a white dress. Victoria holding baby Emma, her face glowing with maternal pride. Victoria laughing at some event, her head thrown back in joy. It was like looking at photographs of herself in a life she'd never lived. The same face showing different emotions, different experiences, different choices. Claire touched one of the pictures gently, tracing the outline of her twin's smile, and felt grief wash over her for a person she'd never known, but was connected to in the most fundamental way possible. She had a niece. She had family. After 32 years of being alone, of being the girl nobody wanted to keep, she had blood relatives who needed her. The realization was terrifying and beautiful all at once. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting at Harbor Brew, and Claire found herself standing outside a playground in Green Lake Park, watching children climb and swing and shout with unrestrained energy. Marcus had texted her that morning with a simple invitation. Emma wants to feed the ducks. Would you like to join us? No pressure either way. Claire had stared at that message for 20 minutes before responding with a single word. Yes. Now she stood clutching a paper bag of breadcrumbs she'd purchased from a nearby bakery, her stomach twisted in knots of anticipation and fear. What did you say to a niece you'd never met? How did you explain to a child that you were connected by blood, but separated by circumstances neither of you had controlled? The questions had kept her awake most of the night, cycling through her mind until dawn broke gray and uncertain over the city. She spotted them before they saw her. Marcus walking slowly along the path, Emma skipping ahead in a yellow raincoat despite the cloudless sky. The little girl held a stuffed rabbit under one arm and pointed excitedly at every dog they passed. Claire's heart clenched at the sight. This was her family. This child carried half of Victoria's genes, which meant she also carried half of Claire's. They were connected in ways that transcended the years of separation and silence. Emma noticed her first. The child stopped mid-skip, her whole body going still as she stared across the grass. Claire saw recognition flash across that small face, saw hope kindle in eyes that were the exact shade of hazel she saw in her own mirror every morning. Then Emma was running, her raincoat flapping behind her like yellow wings. Claire's instinct was to step back, to protect herself from the intensity of emotion rushing toward her. But she held her ground as Emma skidded to a stop just in front of her, suddenly shy now that the distance had closed. "Hi," Emma said softly. "You came." "I did," Claire replied, kneeling down so they were at eye level. "Your dad said you wanted to feed the ducks." Emma nodded seriously. "Daddy says you're my aunt. That you're Mommy's sister. Is that true?" Claire glanced up at Marcus, who had caught up and now stood a respectful distance away, giving them space but ready to intervene if needed. She looked back at Emma and found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "It is true. I know it must be very confusing." "It is confusing," Emma agreed with the brutal honesty of children. "But it's also kind of nice. I always wanted an aunt." Marcus suggested they walk along the lake path, and they fell into step together. Emma positioned herself between the two adults, holding her father's hand on one side, and after a moment of hesitation, reaching for Claire's hand on the other. The gesture was so simple, so trusting, that Claire felt tears prick behind her eyes. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, Emma pointing out interesting rocks and pretty flowers, Marcus occasionally interjecting with gentle corrections when his daughter's enthusiasm led her too close to the water's edge. Claire found herself relaxing incrementally, the tight band of anxiety around her chest loosening with each normal moment that passed. When they reached the duck pond, Emma produced her own bag of breadcrumbs and demonstrated the proper technique for feeding waterfowl. You have to throw it gently, so you don't scare them, and you have to share with all the ducks, not just the pretty ones. The ugly ones are hungry too. That's very wise, Claire said, genuinely impressed by the child's compassion. Did your mom teach you that? Emma's face clouded briefly. Mommy taught me lots of things. Daddy tries to remember them all, but sometimes he forgets. She looked up at Claire with those two knowing eyes. Will you tell me about when Mommy was little? Daddy didn't know her then. Claire felt panic rise in her throat. I didn't know your mom when she was little either, sweetheart. We didn't grow up together. Why not? Emma asked with the directness of the very young. If you're sisters, why didn't you live in the same house? Marcus cleared his throat, preparing to intervene, but Claire shook her head slightly. She'd known this question would come eventually. Better to answer it honestly than try to dodge or deflect. Sometimes families get separated when they're very young. It's complicated and sad, but it happens. Your mom and I were separated when we were just babies. We never got the chance to know each other. That's really sad, Emma said after considering this information. But at least you can know me now. I'm part of Mommy, so it's kind of like knowing her, right? The simple logic of it struck Claire as both heartbreaking and beautiful. Yes, she said quietly. I think that's exactly right. They spent the next hour wandering through the park, Emma's chatter filling what might have been awkward silences. The child had inherited Victoria's warmth. That much was clear, along with a curiosity that seemed insatiable. She wanted to know everything about Claire. where she lived, what she did at the hospital, whether she had any pets, what her favorite color was, if she liked chocolate or vanilla ice cream better. Claire answered as honestly as she could, finding that talking to Emma was easier than she'd anticipated. There was no judgment in the child's questions, no hidden agenda, just genuine interest in getting to know this new person who had appeared in her life. When Emma ran ahead to examine something that had caught her attention, Marcus moved closer to Claire, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry if this is overwhelming. I know Emma can be a lot when she gets excited." "It's not overwhelming," Claire said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "It's actually kind of wonderful. I've never had anyone be this interested in me before." Marcus smiled, but there was sadness in it. Victoria was like that too. Once you were in her orbit, she wanted to know everything about you. Made everyone feel important and seen. They watched Emma crouch down to inspect a beetle making its way across the path. The child was narrating the insect's journey in a dramatic voice, giving it a backstory and destination. Claire found herself smiling at the elaborate story Emma was weaving from nothing. "She's special," Claire said. "You're doing a good job with her." "Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together," Marcus admitted. "Being a single parent wasn't something I ever imagined." Victoria was the one who knew how to handle the emotional stuff, how to explain hard concepts in ways Emma could understand. "I'm better with logic and structure, which doesn't help much when your 5-year-old is crying about missing her mother." "You're here," Claire pointed out. "You're showing up and trying. That counts for more than you probably realize." Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you for coming today. I know this situation is strange for everyone involved, but it means a lot to Emma. And to me." Before Claire could respond, Emma came running back with the beetle carefully cupped in her hands. "Look, his name is Harold, and he's going to visit his grandma, who lives in that tree over there. Do you want to help me take him?" They walked together to the designated tree, a massive oak with roots that created natural steps perfect for climbing. Emma placed Harold carefully at the base and wished him well on his journey. Then she turned to Claire with sudden seriousness. "Will you come back to see me again?" Claire looked down at this child who was both a stranger and family, who carried her twins' legacy forward into an uncertain future. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to maintain distance, to avoid the inevitable pain that came with caring for people. But looking into Emma's hopeful face, she found those instincts quieting. "I like that," Claire said. "If your dad says it's okay." Emma looked at Marcus, who nodded with a gentle smile. "Then it's settled," Emma announced with satisfaction. "You can be my aunt for real now." Over the following weeks, Claire found herself increasingly woven into the fabric of Marcus and Emma's lives. It started with occasional visits to the park or brief coffee meetings where Emma would chatter about school, while Claire and Marcus exchanged the kinds of small talk people make when they're still figuring each other out. But gradually, almost without Claire noticing, those meetings became more frequent, more comfortable, more necessary. Emma's teacher called one afternoon while Claire was between shifts at the hospital. There had been an incident at school, the teacher explained, and Emma was refusing to talk to anyone. Marcus was stuck in an important meeting and couldn't leave. Would Claire be able to come? Claire arrived at the school to find Emma sitting alone in the corner of the classroom, her rabbit clutched to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. The teacher explained in hushed tones that another student had said something cruel about Emma's mother being dead, and Emma had shut down completely. Claire approached slowly, sitting down on the floor next to her niece without touching, without demanding anything. They sat in silence for several minutes before Emma finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "Tyler said that my mom is never coming back, that dead people stay dead forever. Is that true?" "Yes," Claire said gently, because what else could she say? "That's true. Death is forever, and I'm so sorry that it is." Emma's tears fell harder. "I try really hard to remember her face, but it's getting fuzzy, like she's disappearing even more." Claire reached out slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted. When the child didn't move, Claire wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. "That must be really scary. But you know what? The love your mom had for you, that doesn't disappear. It stays with you forever in your heart. And even if her face gets fuzzy sometimes, you can look at pictures, You can ask your dad to tell you stories. You can talk to people who knew her. Like you, Emma said, leaning into Claire's embrace. You look just like her. So when I look at you, I can remember. Yes, Claire agreed, even though the responsibility of that felt enormous. Like me. They sat together until Emma's tears subsided, until the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Marcus arrived as they were walking out, worry etched across his features until he saw them together, Emma's hand firmly clasped in Claire's. Everything okay? He asked, his eyes meeting Claire's over Emma's head. We had a rough afternoon, Claire said, but we talked through it. I think she's going to be okay. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Marcus and Claire sat in his living room nursing glasses of wine. The house was beautiful in that way wealthy people's homes often were, all clean lines and expensive furniture. But Claire noticed the lived-in details too. Emma's drawings covering the refrigerator, a basket of toys in the corner, photographs everywhere of Victoria, ensuring her presence was still felt in every room. Thank you for coming today, Marcus said. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been available. I'm glad I could help, Claire replied honestly. Emma's been through so much. She deserves all the support we can give her. Marcus studied her for a moment. You know, Victoria would have really liked you. Claire felt that familiar ache, the grief for a sister she never knew. I wish I could have met her. Really met her, not just learned about her after she was gone. Me too, Marcus said quietly. I think you two would have been close. She always wanted siblings. Used to tell me she felt like something was missing from her life, like there was a space that should have been filled but wasn't. Now I understand what she meant. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that only develops between people who've moved past the need to fill every gap with words. Claire looked around the room, at the life Victoria had built, and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for what her twin had lost by dying so young. Grief for the relationship they'd never had, but also something unexpected. Gratitude. Because even though the circumstances were tragic, Claire had found family, had found a place where she belonged. Marcus's voice interrupted her thoughts. I've been thinking about something. Emma's birthday is coming up next month. She's turning 6. I know it's asking a lot, but I was hoping you might want to be there. Help me celebrate. Of course, Claire said without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it. The party was small, just a few of Emma's classmates and their parents, Margaret the housekeeper, and Claire. Marcus had transformed the backyard into a princess wonderland per Emma's request, complete with a bounce house and a table laden with pink frosted cupcakes. Emma wore a plastic tiara and spent the afternoon radiating joy, showing off her new aunt to anyone who would listen. Claire found herself swept up in the festivities, helping serve cake and organize games, feeling more connected to this makeshift family than she'd ever felt to any of the foster families that had taken her in over the years. When it came time to open presents, Emma insisted that Claire sit next to her, wanting to show her aunt each gift as it was unwrapped. Claire's gift was last, a small box wrapped in purple paper. Emma tore into it with characteristic enthusiasm, then went still when she saw what was inside. It was a locket, silver and delicate, with space for 2 photos inside. Claire had placed a picture of Victoria on one side and left the other empty. The empty side is for a picture of us, Claire explained as Emma stared at the locket. So you can carry both of us with you. Your mom and your aunt. The family that loves you. Emma threw her arms around Claire's neck, the locket clutched carefully in one small fist. Thank you, Aunt Claire. This is the best present ever. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Claire helped Marcus clean up the backyard. They worked in comfortable silence, gathering discarded paper plates and deflating the bounce house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for the ordinary moment. Claire, Marcus said suddenly, there's something I've been wanting to say, but I wasn't sure how. Claire paused in her cleanup, giving him her full attention. These past few months, having you in our lives, it's been healing. For Emma, obviously, but also for me. You've helped me remember that life goes on, that new connections can be made even after terrible loss. I just wanted you to know how much that means. Claire felt warmth spread through her chest. It's been a lot to me, too. I spent so long feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. But here, with you and Emma, I finally feel like I found my place. Marcus smiled, and in that smile, Claire saw acceptance, gratitude, and something that looked like hope. Victoria gave us both a gift, even though she never knew it. She gave us each other. Inside the house, they could hear Emma singing to herself, probably playing with her new toys. The sound was pure and joyful, the sound of a child who was learning to be happy again despite loss. Claire thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The years of loneliness, the questions without answers, the feeling of being incomplete. All of it had led here, to this family, to this sense of belonging. She would never get to know Victoria, would never have the sisterly relationship she'd been denied by circumstance and secrets. But she had Emma. She had Marcus. She had a family who wanted her not as a replacement for someone lost, but as herself, valuable and important in her own right. As the last light faded from the sky, Claire helped Marcus carry the final bags of trash to the garage. Emma appeared in the doorway, her new locket already around her neck, her rabbit under one arm. "Aunt Claire, are you staying for dinner? Daddy's making spaghetti." Claire looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked at Emma, at this child who had grabbed hold of her heart without permission and refused to let go. "I'd love to stay," Claire said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They walked into the house together. This unlikely family built from tragedy and chance encounters, from impossible resemblances and revealed secrets. The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Claire helped Emma set the table while Marcus cooked, and for the first time in 32 years, she felt completely at home. Later that night, after dinner and stories and tucking Emma into bed, Claire stood on the front porch preparing to leave. Marcus walked her out, his hands in his pockets, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Sunday dinner is becoming a tradition." "I'll be here," Claire promised. As she drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, Claire thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. Margaret Harrison's impossible decision to separate her twins. The tragic accident that sent Claire into foster care. The chance encounter at the hospital that started unraveling secrets decades old. Every piece had been necessary. Every painful moment had served a purpose, bringing her to exactly where she needed to be. She pulled into her apartment parking lot and sat for a moment before going inside, looking at the lights of the city and feeling profoundly grateful. Grateful for Emma's innocent hope that had pushed her to take a chance. Grateful for Marcus's determination to find the truth. Grateful even for the pain of the past, because it made the joy of the present that much sweeter. Claire Whitmore Morrison had spent her entire life searching for where she belonged. And finally, impossibly, wonderfully, she had found it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.